Hey Pokemon players, this is the latest episode of the PokePopCast, and today we're going to be talking about how to survive a deck check. So this is going to be more from the player's point of view. There'll be some pointers in here for judges as well, but mostly this is pointers for players. The first thing to know about deck checks are judges are not out to get you. Judges are out to get you if you're cheating, but other than that, judges are basically trying to maintain the integrity of the event, make sure people don't have an advantage they shouldn't have, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And there's a large gray area where, it's hard to tell if somebody's doing something on purpose or not. So there are penalties regardless of whether the player is doing it on purpose. So first thing with the deck check is Pokemon requires that 20% of the decks in a tournament be checked. Now, that doesn't mean that a deck is going to get checked once and never checked again. That would be pretty stupid if you think about it, because any player who is trying to take advantage of things could get a deck check early on and say, well, I'm free to do whatever I want now and not worry about it. So it is quite possible for decks to get the same deck to get checked multiple times in the tournament. So the things that a judge are checking for is, number one, they're checking if someone's cheating, but they're also just checking if there are errors. It could be players using cards that are out of format. It could be players not clearly defining what cards they are using, so it opens up a possibility of cards being switched out. Checking condition of cards, condition of sleeves, making sure that they don't lead to any type of advantage. So what type of consequences are there, not to get you too worried, but just to let you know what the types of consequences that can come from having a bad deck check, if your deck and list and cards are not up to snuff. Number one, most deck check penalties start at a game loss. In a single game tournament, obviously that's a round loss. In match play, best 2 out of 3, losing one of the games is a pretty significant downside. And there is one type of deck check category that does not get a game loss. That is where both the deck are legal and the deck list are legal. If you have a problem with your deck list or a problem with your deck, that's going to lead to a game loss. How it gets fixed is another matter, but the penalty would be a game loss. However, if the problem is that the deck list is legal and the deck are legal, but when you compare the two, they don't match up, then that penalty starts out, and I'll clarify here, starts out at a prize loss. However, depending on what type of an advantage it might have given, how bad that mismatch is, how many rounds were played, what the potential advantage is, that could escalate. And penalties can always escalate depending on how big the advantage can be seen as. And of course, if it is determined that the player either, and this is a big either was cheating, or the potential advantage, and I'll emphasize the potential advantage, because if we're not determining the player's cheating, we're not saying they took advantage of this advantage, but if the potential advantage is so great, then that could result in a disqualification. For example, a player is playing with 5 rainbow energies through 9 rounds of a regional. Having that extra rainbow energy for 9 rounds is a huge advantage and has to lead to a disqualification. Something like that. Whether it was on purpose or by accident, it doesn't matter in that case. Now, I want to make a quick aside here for judges. There was, a couple of years ago, there was a pretty big change in how Pokemon wanted deck checks handled, deck lists, deck errors handled. And in conjunction with organized play, I wrote up an article which is on the PokeGym. It's on the compendium part of the PokeGym. We'll put the link down here, which gives advice on how to approach handling deck issues when doing deck checks. I don't want to say it's mandatory, but it's really should be mandatory if you're a judge to read that guidance. It's not because I wrote it. It's because it was written in conjunction with organized play, both research and development, and the organized play manager, to get the advice out that how they wanted things handled. And when it comes down to it, the job of a judge is to do things the way Pokemon organized play wants things handled. So read that. Again, the link is here for that. Okay? End of commercial. Okay, so you're a player and you want to get through a deck check as best as possible. You don't want it ruining your tournament day. What do you need to be concerned about? There are 3 parts to doing having your deck check successfully. Number 1, your list has to be right. Okay, so pretty much every premier event you have to write up a list, except for pre-releases, which don't count as premier events. We'll get into the details in this in a second. Number 2, your actual cards. What condition are your cards in? Are they the right cards? Are they in format versus out of format? And number 3, your sleeves. If you're playing in competitive Pokemon, it's not required to have sleeves, but you really need to have sleeves, because sleeves not only help protect your cards, but help protect against the markings on the backs of your cards becoming an issue. And we'll get into that in a bit. Okay, so those are the 3 things. So number 1, your list. Now, on the Pokemon rules and resources page, you can download a deck list. Okay, link for that here. And I would recommend there are other ways to get a deck list put together. Number 1, a lot of tournament organizers will supply deck lists on site. Just about everyone, if they're a good organizer, will have deck lists available for you on site. And so you can, assuming it's not one of these tournaments where you need to turn your deck list in ahead of time, you can get your deck list written up on site using that. What is better, and what organizers love to see, is one of the online programs used to create your deck list. Because what that does, it gives the organizer or the judges a couple of things. One, gives them a nice, clear, legible list, because it's typed rather than handwritten. It usually performs a check both for format cards and for numbers of cards, and that everything adds up correctly. It also is convenient for you. You don't have to manually rewrite this every time. You can save it and print it out again in the future or make changes to it. In a pinch, you can handwrite on a sheet of paper, a blank sheet of paper, a deck list, but it has to have all the right information. So it's not recommended. And you certainly, if you are going to hand in a sheet of paper, make it an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I've had the occasional player hand in something not like a small slip of paper, or God help me, the back of a pizza box once. That's not acceptable. So going with the most recommended ways, what online places are there to get the online forms? Number 1, pokegym.net. Okay, so we have our deck list creator. It checks your format, it adds everything up correctly, it confirms, it has it all there for the judge that everything's added up correctly. Makes things very easy. If you do need to make a change on the day of the tournament, just make sure those changes are noted correctly on the list. Other sites, Pokemon Trading Card Game Online. Many people are not aware of this, but if you play the trading card game online and have your deck online, there is a function in the deck generator section where you can create and print a list from there. And that is formatted just like a tournament deck list. So that's great too. So the other online deck list creator that you'll see used quite a bit is Arcanine Labs deck list creator. Some of the organizers use it for having deck lists submitted before the tournament, but it's also available for you to create your own deck list. So the link for that is here, player.arcaninelabs.com/decklist. It's functionally has everything you need on there. The only thing I don't like about it is it looks a little plain. It doesn't have the formatting sections for judges to write things in, but it's fine. It's easy to use. It's good to use. So Pokegym.net or Arcanine Labs, judges like seeing either of them. Makes it a lot easier to do the deck list check and make sure that it's right, because it figures out a lot of things for you. Okay, so let's say now you're creating your deck. You've printed out your list, or you've obtained your list, your blank list. Number one, you're going to write it out. Number one, write to be read. Okay, I can't tell you how upsetting it is to judges to have to sit there and argue and figure out, is this a 1 or a 7? Is this a 2 or a 3? I mean, or what is the name of this card? I can't even read it. These deck lists are not just there written to be filed away and not looked at. Judges are going to be looking at these. They don't know your handwriting. You need to be able to write them properly so that they can read them properly, because if you write sloppily and are not clear, that can lead to a penalty, because they can't tell what cards and or not quantities you have in your deck. Okay, so that's important. Now, for energy cards and for trainers, you don't need to put the sets and the collector numbers, but make sure that you put the set and collector numbers for the Pokemon in your deck. I hate giving out a game loss penalty to somebody because they just forgot to list the Pokemon in their deck. Now, it used to be a couple of years ago where if you hadn't marked that, then you would have to, if you had the Pokemon listed but you didn't put the set and collector number, you'd have to take them out of your deck and replace them with basic energy, which would have killed your deck. Using that guidance that I mentioned earlier for judges, and judges pay attention here, current way to handle that is not, if the player has written Squirtle or Frogadier in their deck, but they didn't put the set or collector number, and they have Frogadier in their deck, you can update the deck list using the Frogadier that they have in their deck, but they're still getting a game loss. You're still getting a game loss. You get to keep the card in your deck, but to compensate for the fact that did you have that same Frogadier all tournament, you're getting a game loss. So make sure to put the collector number and that set number in there. Check that the cards you're using are format legal. Okay, we have expanded format, we have standard format. Tournaments are switching back and forth. Maybe you use this deck in an expanded tournament, now you're going to a standard. You want to make sure, or you're a newer player, you want to make sure that the cards you're using are from the current legal sets for that format. Now, some older cards are legal because they've been reprinted in a currently legal set. How do you know what, especially with trainers, how do you know which cards you can use and which cards you can't? Go here. Pokegym.net, current legal card list for both standard and expanded. Okay, we're going to have both links right here. This is something that judges use, and players should make use of it as well. If you're not sure if any particular card is legal or not, especially an older reprinted card, this will tell you. Some of the older cards are not legal because texts have changed. For example, the old Super Rod is not legal. The very old Super Rod is not legal because there was a massive text change. However, some cards that had a text change are legal because Pokemon issued an errata. Rare Candy is an example of that, or Potion. If you look at the older copies of the card, they have different text, they have slightly different effects, but they're legal to play now because there's an errata, and all players are responsible for knowing if a card has an errata or not. Okay, Actually, while we're at it, I'll put that link right here. So here's where you can go to check errata. Again, at the Poke Gym in the compendium, we keep a section updated with every card from every format back to day one that has received an errata. So that's useful as well. Identify the cards fully, especially if there's multiple cards with similar names. If you put down Hammer, we don't know if you mean Crushing Hammer or Enhanced Hammer. There was an issue a couple of years ago when Cedric Juniper came out, and players had been used to just writing Juniper. Well, there was a card Professor Juniper, and there was a card Cedric Juniper, and players just wrote Juniper. Well, now you're getting a game loss, because which card is it? Now, players say, well, obviously it's Professor Juniper because nobody's playing Cedric Juniper, but judges are not there to figure out what card you were playing. It needs to be written correctly. Now, can you use some abbreviations? Sure. If you write DCE, that's double colorless energy, that's a common abbreviation. There's no other card that could be. No judge should give you a problem with that. But make sure that you are clearly indicating what card you are writing there so that it's clear. It's all about being clear of what card you're playing. Unit energy. Okay, so the new cards that have 3 types of energy, special energy, that could be any 3 types, and there's multiple ones. If you just write unit energy but you don't put the energy types that are part of the name, then you're not clear on what card you have in there. Now, we don't expect you to write out grass, psychic, metal, or whatever the combination is. But just write, the initials, GP, L, or whatever types of energies they are. If you're using, this is another one that comes up quite often. If you're using multiple types of GX Pokemon or EX Pokemon, where they're all the same type, but one is from a set, one is from a promo, and sometimes there's different promos. The correct thing to do is to list the different types and have them separately in your list, because they are, one's from the set, one's a promo. But here's a note to judges. If a player puts down a type of GX Pokemon or EX Pokemon, or that is the only one in existence, they're all functionally identical in terms of the game, and they put 4 times the one in the set, but it turns out they have 2 from the set and 2 that are promos, but they are functionally identical cards. Technically, that's an error, but God help you, don't give them a game loss for that. That is such, it's what we are trying to accomplish here is to not have players gain an advantage. If they are playing identical cards where the set GX Pokemon and the promo GX Pokemon are identical, there's 0 advantage. That does not deserve a game loss. Use your head. That gives them a caution or a warning because they should be doing it properly, but do not give someone a game loss for that. That annoys me quite a bit, to use family language. Now, a lot of the things with the physical cards roll into either the list or the sleeves issue, because you want to make sure, number one, that your cards match your deck. And I covered the alternate art issue. But look at the physicality of your cards. There's 2 main issues that we see with the physicality of the card. Number one is cards that are creased. A lot of times, an expensive card that's hard to get, players will pay less money to get a poor condition card which maybe has a crease in it. And that's fine and legal to play, but here's the danger, and as a player you need to be aware of this to pass the deck list, to pass the deck check, so you don't get hung up on this. And because I've issued game losses over this, and what you want to make sure to do is avoid, you're playing a large number of rounds, and if a card has a crease in it, that crease is going to have slightly different wear where it's the card is bent slightly, not so much that you would notice it, but with a lot of the friction as cards are moving past each other and shuffling, that crease is going to get more wear than other spots around in the card, and now that sleeve is going to be marked. And it doesn't take that many rounds of a big tournament so keep an eye on that. If you have any cards that are not in perfect condition, that have creases, keep an eye on the card back of the sleeve that you have that card in, and check and make sure that that wear is not showing where the crease is, because that will, while the card might not have been marked when you started the tournament, it can cause the card to be marked by the end of the tournament. And if you're doing well, you don't want to get your day ruined by having a marked card at the end of the tournament. The other major issue that we see with physical cards are bending. A lot of the promo cards have significant warping and bending, and I'll call out specifically the Rockruff card as a good example. I have seen numerous players playing with promo Rockruffs, which has a warp to it, right? Kind of a warp to it, which makes that card identifiable. Now, this is something you need to take care of ahead of time if you are playing with cards that have a warp to them like that. You need to get them flat. There are various ways of doing that: bending them back, putting them in underneath of a weight and leaving them there for an extended period of time. But those need to be flat, because if you are deck checked and you have 4 of a card that's critical to get out your Lycanroc GX, and they're all curved and they're the only cards in your deck that are curved, that's not only marked, it's marked with a pattern. And marked with a pattern is a game loss at least. So make sure that any curved cards are not curved, because they will definitely get you in trouble. Alright, so the final thing we want to talk about here are sleeves. And the first thing I'll mention with sleeves, if you're playing in a major tournament, or even if you're playing in a regular local tournament, don't play with your ratty ass filthy damn sleeves. I had a player at a recent tournament at deck check, and they handed me this deck that I didn't want to touch. It was that filthy. And it's, number one, it's not respectful. Your opponent is handling that deck. The judges are handling that deck. But it also is marked. You know, every piece of filth on that deck is a mark. So number one, be respectful to your opponents, be respectful to judges, be respectful to yourself, and don't play with a deck that's filthy. Aside from that, it's marked, and you'll get in trouble for that. Similarly, a deck that has a tremendous amount of wear and tear, something that may be okay for League, if the sleeves are dog-eared, then that potentially is marked. Now, it's actually a saving grace if all the cards have the same dog ear to them, because what makes a card marked is not so much that it has a mark on it, is that it has a mark on it that's different than all the other cards. If all the cards have the same dog ear to them, then you can actually kind of get away with that. But the danger there is if you have switched out some sleeves because sleeves split, and now 4 or 5 of the sleeves in there are brand new and all the rest of them are dog-eared, well, those sleeves are now marked, right? Because they look totally different than the other sleeves. So look at take a look at your deck before you start a tournament, and look at the condition of the sleeves. Do they look new? That's really what you're going for. You want a new deck, new sleeves, especially if you're going to a big tournament. If you're going to regionals, you've spent hundreds of dollars going to regionals, spend $5 on a new set of sleeves. Now, the other thing, aside from worn sleeves versus not worn sleeves, is if you are changing out sleeves on some of your cards, make sure that they are in fact identical to your existing sleeves. There's nothing worse than replacing some of your sleeves and it turns out they're not exactly the same. Maybe the length is slightly different. Maybe the gloss versus matte is slightly different. Maybe even the color is slightly different. You know, they're very close, but you know, they come from different lots. And so when you put them next to each other, you can see the difference. So spread your cards out. Take a look. See if any cards stand out to you as looking different than the other cards. If they do, then that's marked. And if, especially if they're on cards that are related to each other, then that now becomes marked with a pattern. So that's how you can avoid trouble there. Make sure that you're not changing out sleeves and leaving yourself exposed with now having different sleeves. Okay? Double sleeving. Double sleeving is allowed, but here's the critical thing. The card backs need to be clear or Pokemon artwork. Now, a lot of the sleeve, the outer sleeves that people place their good sleeves into have a little pattern around the edge of one side. That cannot be on the card back because that now is a design on the card back. And a note to judges here, if players are playing with that little design around the edges on the face of the cards, that's fine. There's a rule about the front of the card not being obscured, but the little squiggly lines around the borders of some of these protective secondary sleeves, they're not obscuring anything. Again, use your head. What are we trying to accomplish here? We're looking for advantage. If this is not causing an advantage, and it's not, the little squiggly thing, as long as it's on the card face, right, the face of the cards, as opposed to the back, as long as it's there and it's not obscuring any information, take a look at the, while we're looking, right, so here's the edges, you got a little squiggly here, there's nothing obscured. That's not a problem. Don't make it a problem. Don't give players trouble over that. All right, so that I think is about my advice for surviving a deck check. Number one, don't cheat. Didn't mention that before, but if you are cheating, then hopefully the judges will find that. But assuming you're not cheating, judges are not out to get you. They're out to get the guy cheating. But write your list up correctly. Write your list up legibly. Make sure your deck matches your list. Make sure your cards are in good shape, either not bendy or not creased, and if they are creased, make sure your sleeves are replaced often enough so that that crease does not affect markings on the actual sleeve. Make sure your sleeves are legal. Make sure your sleeves are in good shape. If they're not in good shape, make sure they're all in the same bad shape and don't have any good sleeves sticking out like a sore thumb. Okay, we're looking for patterns here, right? Basically, if you're doing things correctly, you're not going to get in a problem. You're not going to have any trouble. And that's about it. Good luck at tournaments. Good luck at the upcoming events, and I hope to see you at some of them. Take care.